Good evening, Australia. Welcome to Fake Real News. As always, I am your host, Iron Steel Braithwaite. Tonight, we'll feature a short segment which provides a guerrilla history-style investigation into massacres of Indigenous people that took place in Appin. The Macarthur region where Appin is situated is home to the Dharawal, Darug and Gundungurra people. When early European settlers first arrived in the Macarthur region, they realised quickly the bounty and prosperity possible in the area. They began cultivating the land on large farms and reared cattle. Historian Grace Karskens provides details into the origins of the massacres, stating that tensions began to rise between the Europeans and the Indigenous around 1814. This came as a result from indiscretions from both Indigenous and settlers. Karskens isolates the shooting of a young Gundungurra boy who was caught taking maize as the earliest catalyst for the massacres. During this shooting, a soldier was fatally wounded by a spear. This resulted in multiple revenge attacks between the two sides. When contrasting this modern understanding of the origins of the massacres to the journal of Governor Lachlan Macquarie, there is a clear difference. Macquarie's entry on the 10th of April, 1816, provides his rationale into the orders he gave that resulted in the massacres. This entry states that the murder of settlers, destruction of their property and the theft of grain by local Indigenous people was the catalyst for these orders. Macquarie describes these actions by the Indigenous as incursions, that is, to invade or attack. Clearly, the irony of this was lost on him. Macquarie asserts that the Indigenous continued these hostile actions despite the settlers' attempts to persuade them to stop. It was decided that action must be taken against the Aborigines, so as to prevent these actions from continuing and to not show fear. Macquarie gave the orders for 3 military detachments to march through the remote areas of the colony and drive the Indigenous across the mountains. Macquarie gave additional instructions for the men to attempt to apprehend the Indigenous who murdered settlers and to take as many natives prisoner as possible. If any Indigenous people showed the slightest amount of resistance, the soldiers were ordered to fire on them immediately to force them to surrender. Furthermore, any survivors who were killed were to be strung up in the trees to strike greater terror into the survivors. Macquarie's writings are reflective of early settlers' perceptions of Indigenous people at the time. That is, that they weren't welcome on colonial land and that they were the invaders. When examining his journal entries on the incident, not once do we see any consideration of the Indigenous people as people, nor any cogitation that they perceive the colonials as the invaders. The diary of Captain James Wallace provides insight into the events that unfolded following the orders given by Macquarie. Wallace describes how the soldiers discovered a camp of Indigenous people and began firing on them. The Indigenous fled from the shooting, whether because of the dark or out of fear. Several fell over a cliff and died. Several women and children were also killed, which Wallace stated was regretful. By the end of the incident, 14 bodies were found, and some were taken prisoner. The account of a young Appin boy, William Bone, sheds further light on the situation, describing how some of the bodies of the Indigenous were mutilated, their heads removed and taken. Macquarie provided a statement to the Sydney Gazette about the incident on May 4th. Macquarie downplayed the incident, stating only several natives had been killed or wounded, and claimed that they were to blame for not surrendering when the soldiers demanded them to. This is a repeated theme in Macquarie's writing. Whilst there was some accounts of Indigenous people having a slight understanding of the English language, not all did at this time. The vast majority of the Indigenous did not understand English, and were merely fleeing out of fear. The dreadful events of that evening are still felt even today. A memorial service is held every year in honour of those who passed. A commemorative plaque has also been erected by the Wallandilly Council. The National Museum of Australia has housed 3 of the skulls of the dead since 1991. Descendants of the Dharawal people involved in the massacre are still to this day trying to have them repatriated, with no luck so far. One descendant, a man by the name Gavin Andrews, has said that the land where the massacre took place is spiritually unsafe, and that the Indigenous do not visit the site for that reason. Andrews believes the land will remain this way until the skulls are returned there. The events of the Appin Massacres were truly horrific and severely impactful on the Indigenous people of the MacArthur region. The repatriation of the skulls would assist in healing this damage that has been done. This humble reporter sincerely hopes that this will occur soon. Until such a time, this is where the investigation ends. Well, that is all we have time for this evening, Australia. I am Iron Steel Braithwaite, and that's the way it is.